I recommend that criminal sexual offenses should be within the exclusive jurisdiction of the civilian criminal courts. This was the case prior to 1998. Military justice rests on the need to, and I quote, enhance efficiency, discipline, and morale in the armed forces. No other rationale was advanced in 1998 to vest jurisdiction in the military system for sexual offenses, which until then had been within the exclusive purview of civilian courts, as murder, for instance, still is today. The handling of sexual offenses by military court in the past 20 years has done very little to improve efficiency, discipline, and morale. If anything, it has served to erode it. Therefore, I see no basis for the Canadian Armed Forces to retain any jurisdiction over sexual offenses, and that jurisdiction should be vested exclusively with civilian authorities. As long as concurrent jurisdiction remains, the evidence so far indicates that the CAF will continue to consider itself the primary jurisdiction and that civilian authorities will happily decline to exercise it. This is particularly surprising considering that, on average, the military justice system handles approximately 30 sexual offense cases per year, and that's combining summary trials and court-martial, while civilian courts process over 2,300 such cases every year. Worse still, the idea that the choice of forum should rest on victims imposes on them an unfair burden, as they could never be fully equipped to make an informed decision. I also recommend that the duty imposed on CAF members to report sexual misconduct should be abolished. In response to the long-standing problem of underreporting, the CAF leadership stressed the existence of the duty to report, which rests both on victims and bystanders alike. This serves only to impose additional hardship on victims while posing moral dilemmas on those wanting to respect their wishes. I note that last week the minister announced an amendment to the Queen's Regulation and Orders purporting to relieve senior officers involved in the class actions restorative engagement process from that dilemma. I think it's really important that the same be done for the rest of the CAF members who are confronted with that issue on a daily basis. I also recommend that victims of sexual harassment and discrimination should be facilitated access to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and Tribunal, and that better resources be made available through the Sexual Misconduct Resource Centre. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal is an external source of expertise which has already had a very important impact on the integration of women in the CAF. I simply recommend that the CAF should stop objecting when complainants seek redress in that forum. Turning now to leadership development, I recommend measures to speed up and improve recruitment and basic training. I am very concerned about the future of the two military colleges as undergraduate institutions. Almost half of the commissioned officers in the CAF receive their education in military colleges. Others attend civilian universities while undergoing military training. The officer naval cadets at RMC Kingston and CMR Saint-Jean are primarily white young men from Ontario and Quebec. At just below 25%, women are better represented there than in the total population of the regular forces and the reserves, where they currently stand at 16.3%. However, this is still far below the average presence of women in civilian universities. The continued prevalence of sexual misconduct at the military colleges is well documented, and I think it's harder to address these issues there than in a civilian environment. While I was not in a position to examine in detail the quality of the academic stream, the military leadership and physical training at these colleges is problematic and does not, in my view, justify the continuation of this model as an undergraduate university environment. I think their future should be fully considered with broad-based consultation. I have made detailed recommendations about the CAF system of performance evaluation and promotions, which I think places too much emphasis on performance and not enough on conduct and character. It's also not conducive to speeding up the accession of women to senior leadership position, and in that regard, I stress the importance of my recommendation to establish a system of progressive targets to increase the representation of women in the ranks of general officer flag officers. And finally, a word about external oversight. My recommendations are all interrelated. If what I have referred to in my report is implemented, then I don't see the need for an inspector general to oversee culture change in relation to sexual misconduct. The minister and the Department of National Defense have an important role to play, and the contribution of civilians should be enhanced throughout as a source of knowledgeable outside expertise. I add that I am concerned, of course, about the multiplication of bureaucracies with powers only to recommend, whatever their structure and composition. The CAF has already a massive amount of existing recommendations that it needs to address. In light of previous inertia in that regard, and of my experience in the implementation of my interim report, I recommend the immediate appointment of an external monitor to ensure the implementation of my recommendations, should, of course, the minister accept them. I look forward to the government's final position on all these issues before the end of the year. In conclusion, let me say this. The conduct of the members of the Canadian military has undergone intense public scrutiny in recent years. This was due in large part to the courage of the many who have come forward to denounce discrimination, harassment, and sexual misconduct. Their efforts will benefit not only the Canadian women who aspire to join the profession of arms, but also the many underrepresented groups who hope for a safe working environment in the development of their career in the CAF. Two things could derail the path to significant change. The first would be to assume that this is only attributable to a culture of misogyny and that change will come naturally with time and just more enlightened attitudes. The second would be for the CAF to think that it can fix its broken system alone. Meaningful change will rest on the political will and the determination of civilians who oversee the Canadian Armed Forces. Still, it will not happen without the support of CAF leaders and ultimately without the goodwill of all its members who are every day entrusted with the duty to protect our country and who do so on our behalf. Thank you.